Okay, welcome everybody. We're gonna just take about 30 more seconds and hopefully some more people will file in and we'll get started. All right. Carl, I see your question. Are you on camera too? The answer to that is no. So welcome everybody. We'll get to a couple points and answer that for you. My name is Bob O'Sullivan. I'm the Associate Publisher of Test Prep here at McGraw-Hill. Welcome to our AP 5 Steps to a 5 webinar on AP Micro and Macroeconomics. This will be covering both. Although, as you probably may know, is our books are separated. We do have a 5 steps guide in micro and another distinct book in macro. And before I turn it over to Dr. Eric Dodge, who's the author of both, I'm gonna just run through a couple of quick housekeeping items. The first is, although we welcome both teachers and students to the session, this is primarily designed as a student-focused review. So teachers that are listening, students that are listening on the recording, please feel free to go out and share this recording with fellow educators and fellow students between now and the test day, but it is primarily based and created for student review. I put a note here about restricting yourself to the Q&A feature and that to avoid the chat feature. But what we found as we go through a couple of these, and as Carl so expertly proved already, is that the chat feature is fine. And in fact, what we found is that the chat feature and the Q&A feature, when you pop questions in as we go along, it does make it feel more interactive and organic. So please, if a question does come up, feel free to throw it in the chat or the Q&A, and I will find it and pass it along to Eric. If you get in there and somebody's already asked the same question you have, press the thumbs up icon, and we know it's of greater importance. To answer your question, Carl, participants cannot see one another. It's been designed that way. You should be able to hear and see both me and Eric, and then hearing Anya and Simone. They're both on the McGraw-Hill side also and are also attending the session. No student data is being collected. For teachers or students that have concerns around that, we can assure you not a risk. Nothing's being collected at all. No names are being seen except for the ones that people have signed up, and no faces are being seen and no data is being collected. The presentation is designed to be interactive. As you'll see, we do, I believe we do, Eric, have some polling, right? As we go through, we're going to ask you some sample questions, some typical multiple choice questions that reflect what you'll see on test day. It makes it more fun and more interactive and interesting for everybody if we have people participate as we go through. Even if you don't know the answers, guess. And that way it makes it a little bit more interesting and makes it better for everybody. And last but not least, the session is being recorded. I've already said it. I'm going to say it 3 more times throughout the presentation. But these are valuable study tools. So teachers, put this out there to your fellow teachers, administrators, students, tell your friends. I'll give you about 10 more seconds to take a picture of that bit.ly, the URL at the bottom. Take a picture with your phone or jot it down quickly. We'll show it again at the end. But that's where the recording will be live tomorrow. So the entire 90-minute session we're about to start or just started will be available at that URL. Send it out to all your friends. We want to get some eyeballs on that. With that, I'm going to send it over to Eric. Eric Dodge, over to you.
Hey, thanks. Thank you all for attending. I'm here at Hanover College in Southern Indiana. As you can see, I'm in a small classroom conference room with a few lovely plants behind me. Here's what we're going to cover today. We're going to go over the kind of the overview of the exam itself, some general tips, what I call, or what we call reader notes, which is kind of what I've learned as a reader, do's and don'ts, you might call them. I was asked to present and discuss one topic from micro and macro, and I decided to spend a little time talking about externalities and then ample reserves. We do have some multiple choice questions that Bob referred to, and one FRQ that we'll look at from each of macro and micro. Real quick about myself, I'm here at Hanover College, as I said, in Southern Indiana. Hanover's the oldest private college in Indiana. We're about to celebrate our bicentennial. I got here in 1995, so it's been a while. I got involved in reading the AP Econ exams in 2000. So this year in May, I guess that'll make it 24 years. I'm originally from Oregon. That picture there on the side is the Oregon coast. I'm a West Coast kid who found his way to the Midwest. In terms of things I like to do, travel is great with the wife and kids. And every summer I look forward to growing tomatoes in my garden. I think those tomatoes might come up again later. All right, so general overview. You probably already know a lot of this stuff. For example, the multiple choice and the FRQ sections are split, and the multiple choice amounts to 2/3 of your grade. You get an hour and 10 minutes to respond to 60 questions. The free response, of course, is the remaining 1/3 of your grade, and you get 1 hour to respond. That includes, or on top of that, you get a 10-minute reading period. They break the FRQs down into one they call long question, that's worth 10 points, and 2 short questions that are each worth 5. The economics exams, if you're a student, probably aware, are different from a lot of AP subjects. For example, US history would require you to look at documents and write essays and stuff. Economics keeps it pretty clean. You're gonna be asked to make assertions about certain things. You're gonna ask to provide brief explanations of concepts or your assertions. You're gonna need to perform some numerical analysis, crunching some simple numbers. And of course, you're gonna need to draw those graphs. All right, some general test taking tips. I'll talk a little bit more specifically about multiple choice and FRQs here in a minute. I think as you're getting ready for this, do the practice tests in a timed, as quiet as you can make it, testing environment. That means put the phone away and use a real timer. Remember, answer every question. There is no longer a penalty for guessing on the multiple choice, but you can't get any points if you leave it blank. So go ahead and guess if that's what it comes down to. You cannot fake your way through the free response questions. You cannot earn that many points by simply guessing and then throwing some random words down. It's important to remember that you can get a 5 on these exams without being perfect. So, don't sweat the being perfect thing. You'd be surprised how the cutoff between 4s and 5s and 3s and 4s is pretty forgiving. I definitely think you should be looking at old exams. They're called released exams that are put out by the College Board or provided by your teacher. And we'll look at more tips here in a couple of minutes. So over the years, some people, not me, but I've borrowed from these people, have kept track of certain types of topics that have been most commonly asked on the FRQs. So I did a little digging, found some of these tabulations, and in the macro side of things, the #1 topic is using and manipulating the ADAS model. You got to be prepared for that. Second most common is currency markets or the foreign exchange. And third is some connection to loanable funds. Sometimes these top three macro topics appear all in the long question number one. On the micro side of things, this does not surprise me. The number one most common topic on the FRQs is something related to monopoly. Find the monopoly output, show the monopoly price. Related to that, quite often, is allocative efficiency. Need to know what that is, need to know where to find deadweight loss. That can also appear in questions related to externalities. Number three happens to be what we call the total revenue test, knowing how elastic or inelastic responses to a price change affect a firm's total revenue. All right, so these are my grader notes, learned on the hard streets of Lincoln, Nebraska and Cincinnati, Ohio. All right, what's the biggest struggle for students? I think it's the explain points. Now, here's what I mean. In the past, you were asked to make an assertion followed by an explanation of that assertion. And they used to separate those as two separate points. So for example, are revenues going to increase, decrease, or stay the same? Explain. And so you made an assertion. And let's say the correct assertion was increase. But then your explanation was a little sloppy. Well, you would get the assertion point, but not the explanation point. So you got half of those 2 points. Now, more often than not, we're seeing the assertion and the explain tied into 1 point, which means a sloppy or incorrect explanation loses everything. You don't get 1 out of 2, you get 0. The other thing that you learn as a reader is a student cannot explain an incorrect assertion. So if the correct assertion is revenues increase, as soon as a student says decrease or stays the same, you're done. It doesn't matter what your explanation says. So I have a junior in high school, and he's right now studying for his US history exam. I'm not picking on US history. I'm trying to relay an anecdote that my son told. He said, you know, Dad, when we're doing these practice exams in US history, I can kind of just frankly BS my way around and get quite a few points. That's not going to happen in econ. I can tell you. You need to know it. And I told my son, this lovely word salad that you are giving your teacher is not going to be appreciated by the readers of your US history essays. Keep it clean and keep it correct. Here's a little table that I think summarizes why the explain point is difficult. There are 4 possible outcomes here, and only one of the 4 gets you the point. You made the correct assertion and your explanation was good enough. So I think the way that these explain points are now being tied together with the assertion point makes this the most difficult thing on the FRQs.
Eric, I think I'm going to ask what we all want to know, which is your son going to be taking AP Micro or Macro?
You know what? They don't offer it at his school.
Oh, he's not. You're not at the same school. I figured you were teaching at the school. Okay, that's a relief. Okay, got it. Thanks.
Of course, he could self-study, but we'll see how that goes. All right, some things to know about multiple choice. These are just my thoughts. When I take multiple choice exams, or when I did, my best strategy, the strategy that worked best for me was I read the prompt and I visualized the right answer. I don't look at the choices first. I know what the right answer is, and then find that in the choices. I think that's a time saver. At least it was for me. Remember, no question is worth, on the multiple choice side, no question is worth more than any other. So if you are struggling with number 9, circle it, come back to it, move on. The clock is ticking. A lot of the questions in the multiple choice side are referencing or are expecting you to be using one of the graphs that you learned. Why not draw that in the margins of the book? I mean, I figure if you paid for the book, you might as well use those the margins of the book. Sketch it out. You'll probably see the right answer. It's important to remember that with this standardized test, that once that bubble sheet leaves the room, you will never see it again. You need to make sure that those bubbles are clearly filled in and not sloppy either. You'll never know if some of your missed points are because of bad bubbling. I think the same is true of smudgy erasers. If your eraser is smudging that bubble, make sure you get a clean one. And man, back in my day, taking multiple choice tests, I was always making sure that I was bubbling the correct question, that it lined up. I'm bubbling question number 10. I need to be making sure that it's lined up with the actual question number 10. Every time you turn the page, double check that you're lined up. All right, FRQs. What is this? Bob, you can see that?
Hey, it's not that clear. Can you
It
increase
is
it?
not
or-
here. That
There
is
we
what
go.
that
Yep.
is.
Perfect.
Draw big graphs, my friends. Do not draw postage stamp graphs. Why are you trying to save paper? I have never in 23 years seen a student run out of paper in those exam booklets. Draw a big graph. Trust me, it'll make it easier for the reader to find the points. Related to that, readers are people too. Help them help you. They cannot score points for you if they can't understand what you are writing. If you are writing too small, if you are writing in some weird script, if you are writing at an odd, imperceptible, angle, they are grading thousands of these. You need to make it easy on them to find your points. Follow the directions. I know your teachers have been drilling you on this, but if the exam is saying label the monopoly price PM, why are you labeling it P1? If they are saying label full employment level of output, YF on a macro exam, why are you labeling it anything other than YF? Again, this is going to be in front of a reader. They are going to be working from a very rigid rubric, and they are looking for PM. They are looking for YF in the correct places. Once you've answered the question, stop writing. Again, this is not your US history exam. If the answer is revenues increase, period, stop. The only way you will lose that point is if you immediately follow that up with, and sometimes it stays the same. Your readers have been trained to look for direct contradictions to the correct answer. So stop writing. Labels matter. This is an actual picture from my Kroger. What is Kroger trying to sell me here? I took this picture last fall. Is it yellow squash? That's what the label says, but I don't see any yellow squash. Are they peppers? That's what the box says, but I don't see any peppers. It looks like peaches, but how can I tell? The labels are confusing me. For example, in macroeconomics, if you're drawing the ADAS graph, you will absolutely lose points if you put a dollar sign on the vertical axis and a Q on the horizontal axis. I know, maybe your teacher doesn't care. Maybe your teacher won't deduct those points, but trust me, on a standardized exam, those readers will be deducting a point for incorrect labels, and also it's wrong. So label things correctly, stay within the lines, you'll be okay. Students probably don't know this. These rubrics that we use in grading the FRQs allow for some flexibility. We call them consistency points. And if you're consistently wrong, I know that sounds weird, you can actually earn quite a few points. Here's an example. You're asked to draw the monopoly graph and you put the monopoly output in the wrong place. Okay, you lost your first point, but you're also asked to identify the price. And if you put that price correctly from the wrong output, you can get that price point. And in fact, you can get several other graphing points, like shade the area of consumer surplus, identify the area of economic profit, stuff like that. The idea here in the rubric, to keep it flexible, is that incorrectly getting off to the wrong start doesn't completely bomb your FRQ. This is a tragic thing that I see every year. You're going to open the exam booklet, and on the inside first page, there's a big type that says, "Don't write on this page because nothing on this page will be scored." And every year, somebody brings me an exam booklet and says, "Look, this guy's got a perfect score on question 1, but he put it on that page." That's a 0. This gets back to the whole follow directions thing. Don't be the guy who scores a perfect 5 on that page. Show your work. Seriously, you're going to be asked to do some math on your FRQs. Both micro and macro have been doing this pretty much every year. Seriously, show your work. For example, you're asked to calculate profit. Profit is $50 minus $10, which equals $40. That's showing your work. You get a point. This is not worth a point. Or I'm sorry, this does not earn the point. Just saying profit is $40. It's sad because we know you calculated $40. That didn't just come from thin air, but you were asked to show your work and you didn't. And this gets back to the follow directions thing. Finally, we are able to use calculators now. I tell my students in college, calculators are a crutch. If you don't know how to compute something, whether it's an elasticity or the area of consumer surplus or deflating nominal GDP to real GDP, the calculator is worthless. You got to know your stuff. Again, you can't fake it in your AP economics exams. All right, let's move to study recommendations. Again, everybody studies differently. These are just thoughts that I've had if it were me. Now we're about 6 weeks away or something like that. I would call this now, between now and exam time, crunch time. I would take, if you have that 5 steps book, highly recommended, take the diagnostic exam and figure out where your strengths and weaknesses are. Review the material again, and then again. If we are thinking about 4 weeks away from the exam, if you hadn't already, take the practice exams that are in the book or online or both, and review the material again, and then again. Maybe 2 weeks before the exam, it's time to, if you haven't already, make an appointment to meet with your teacher, ask the questions, figure out why you keep getting this question wrong. If they are offering review sessions, you need to attend every single one. Study by yourself, study with friends, whatever works for you. I think it's common sense, night before the exam, get a good night's sleep, get a good breakfast in the morning, It seems reasonable because it is reasonable. All right. Let me take a little bubbly break. Okay, so as I mentioned in the beginning, I thought of 2 topics, one in micro and one in macro, that we could spend a little time going over. This by no means is an exhaustive review, but I'm going to hit kind of the highlights or the basics. All right, what are externalities? Well, externalities are difficult points to earn in micro, I have found. Maybe it's because it's nearing the end of the semester and this is one of those topics that is abbreviated in the classroom or cut. But man, you're going to see a lot of questions on externalities. All right, so quick review. When there's an exchange of a product in a market, if it creates what we call spillover costs, you can think of that as harm or damage to someone else, somebody who's not involved in the buying and selling of the product. We call that a negative externality. On the other hand, when the exchange of a product in a market creates a spillover benefit, something good, something enjoyable, or maybe it boosts somebody's earnings even, we call it a positive externality. Let's start with negative externalities, all right? I also teach environmental economics, and so I almost always present negative externalities on the supply side of a market. So what's going on when you present negative externalities this way is that you have a marginal private cost curve that represents the market supply of some product, right? Those marginal costs are upward sloping. Those are, the labor, the energy, the raw materials. Those are the costs that the producers incur. But what if the production of this product creates some sort of pollution and that harms people downriver, downwind, or whatever? They're not involved in this product, but they're being harmed by it. On top of the marginal private costs, we would add spillover costs. That's the damage to those other people. And when you put those two together, we get what is called marginal social cost. So this is how you typically see it. You've got this downward sloping demand curve. That's marginal private benefit, marginal social benefit. The difference in this market is on the supply side. You've got a marginal private cost curve. That's this upward sloping supply, and that lies below what I call the supply to society, or the marginal social cost. That vertical gap is the spillover cost, the damage to other people. Now, if you notice, the market outcome, Q market, lies to the right of Q social. What I mean by that in my notation is that the market is going to produce too much of this product relative to the socially efficient quantity. If we could figure out a way for the market to incorporate those spillover costs on other folks, then we would be at Q social. But the market has no incentive to incorporate those costs. Because they're not incorporated, you get this triangle of deadweight loss. So I say to my students, when you have a negative externality, the market produces too much of a bad thing. You can do this on the demand side. It's not as common, but you can. One example that a lot of people will use when they do negative externalities on the demand side is secondhand smoke. When you receive a face full of smoke from a smoker, that creates harm. That's a spillover cost to you. But that's not coming from the factory that's producing the cigarette. It's coming from the consumer or the demander of the cigarette. So here's how we would incorporate that. We would say that the marginal private benefit to the smokers, in my example, there should be a subtraction from that. We'll call spillover costs to the recipients of the secondhand smoke. And when you subtract that spillover cost, you get marginal social benefit. So on a graph, you would see this as a difference on the demand side. Demand private is the marginal private benefit from people who like to smoke cigarettes. The subtraction of the spillover cost shows the marginal social benefit that lies vertically below the marginal private benefit. You might notice again that the market quantity lies to the right of the socially efficient quantity. The market, the buyers and the sellers of cigarettes have no incentive, no desire, not a care in the world about people who are getting secondhand smoke. The deadweight loss triangle, again, is that area between Q market and Q social, showing that the market produces too much of a bad thing. All right, let's switch to positive externalities, and we can come back and answer any questions if they pop up now or later, I suppose. All right, the typical way of showing positive externalities is on the demand side. We have a marginal private benefit that goes to the people who are buying something. They're consumers and they get private benefit. But what if in their buying of something, somebody else benefits from that? I mentioned that my tomatoes were going to come back. Here's where they come back. My next door neighbor right across the fence in my backyard has a beehive. He's a beekeeper. I've got on my side of the fence a bunch of tomatoes every summer. He's buying beehives, and those bees, bless their little buzzy hearts, they come over to my yard and they pollinate my tomatoes, and I get more tomatoes. So on top of the benefit that my neighbor gets, I get a spillover benefit. And when we add those two together, we get marginal social benefit for buying and selling beehives. So here's how I would draw that. I've got the private demand curve, that's the marginal private benefit, lying vertically below the marginal social benefit. And that vertical gap are the spillover benefits that freeloading, free riding neighbors like me receive in the form of a bigger tomato harvest. There's that triangle of deadweight loss because the market, buyers and sellers of beehives, don't incorporate in any way the benefits that people like me get. So the market underproduces, or I tell my students, we get too little of a good thing. All right, now it's also possible, although not as common, not very common at all actually, but you could do it, to put positive externalities on the supply side of a market. One example might be in the market where antiviral drugs are being produced and distributed, let's say anti-malarial drugs. That benefits everybody. But on the supply side of things, if these especially are being nearly given away, we might say that we have a marginal private cost of producing antiviral drugs. Those are the costs of, of the drug makers, drug producers. And if we incorporate spillover benefits to society by having more widespread distribution of these drugs, then we could subtract from the marginal private costs spillover benefits, making the marginal social costs actually lower. So here's how you draw that. You have the marginal private costs of producing the drugs that lies vertically above the marginal social cost. And the vertical gap, again, is the spillover benefit that we would subtract. Once again, the market quantity is to the left of the socially efficient quantity. And that deadweight loss triangle is reflecting that inefficiency, that this market is producing too few of a good thing. So the reason that I point out these alternative ways to think about and draw graphs of both negative and positive externalities is that they are open for testing and have been last year, and likely, I'm guessing, will become more common that they will mix it up a little bit, ask you to show a negative externality on the demand side, for example. I have a feeling that this will become more common. Okay. On the macro side, the topic that I chose to touch on for a couple of minutes is a relatively new one. Teachers in the AP macro, especially community, have been talking about and discussing and learning from each other this notion of ample reserves. And let me kind of give you a little bit of context.
Eric, before you get into it, we went past the hour mark. We're at 4:06, so doing well on time. We just past the 30-minute mark. We're
Yeah.
about 35, 36 minutes in, just for a time check.
All right, cool. Okay, so AP Macro is in a period of transition. What I think of as the old or the traditional way of looking at monetary policy is still happening in the curriculum. It is still happening in some nations. And so teachers are being asked to prepare their students for both. The current approach, which broadly is called ample reserves, is long overdue in the curriculum and came out of the Great Recession when the Federal Reserve, more than a dozen years ago now, basically changed the way they operate. And how that affects you, the student, is that you got to be prepared for both. I say here in the slide, keep a keen eye to the questions. If the prompt says that the banking system has limited or fractional reserves, then you switch your brain over to, oh, those are the old traditional tools, buy bonds and money market and all that stuff. But keep an eye, it's going to happen more often, to the prompt that says the banking system in question is one of ample reserves. And go, okay, I'm going to switch over now. My excellent, awesome teacher taught us this too. So I'm going to address this question with the new policy tools. All right, so another quick overview of these two monetary policies. When you hear limited or fractional reserves, that just means that banks must keep some fraction of all reserves, of all deposits on reserve. That reserve requirement is set by the central bank. Of course, in the United States, that's the Fed, but remember, this is an international exam. So questions are trying to be more inclusive, and they're using central bank more often than Federal Reserve. But the central bank has these traditional tools of open market operations. That's the most common, the one you'll most often see on an exam, especially an old exam. But they could also change the discount rate, change the reserve requirement. So in a recession, you're taught central bank needs to be buying bonds, and you would have this graph in mind showing the vertical money supply shifting to the right and driving down that interest rate. And then you would probably, in an FRQ anyway, be asked to also draw your ADAS, where this expansionary monetary policy shifts AD to the right, the lower interest rate stimulating investment. That moves us closer to full employment, lowers the unemployment rate. And you're talking about this long chain of events. In a recession, we need to increase the money supply. Ideally, it eventually lowers the unemployment rate. And if inflation is the problem, then we need to decrease the money supply. And eventually, that would pull down the price level. So this is what econ teachers and students have been doing forever. And as I said, it's still possible that you'll see this in multiple choice or in FRQs because of that transition. So the current way of doing monetary policy in a banking system with ample reserves is actually simpler to describe and draw on an FRQ. This is just a really quick overview. What the macro course description describes is a policy rate. That is an interest rate. In the US, that's pretty much the federal funds rate. But again, remember, this is an international exam. Any nation would have, if it has ample reserves, its own policy rate. So rather than thinking about that long chain of events that begins with a shift of money supply left or right, we're going to think about a very direct change to the policy rate. And the way that we do that in this model and with the Federal Reserve is that they sandwich the policy rate in between two other rates that they call an administered or administrated rate. We don't need to get into the weeds of that, but if you think of these two interest rates as two slices of bread on a sandwich, and in the middle of the sandwich is your policy rate, like your slice of turkey, they're going to move those slices upward or downward directly to move the policy rate upward or downward with it. So if the economy was in a recession, they would drop those two slices of bread and move the policy rate down. If we were fighting inflation like we are now, they would move both of those up, moving the policy rate with it. And then in theory, aggregate demand would go in the desired direction. So here's a version of the ample reserves graph. We've got a vertical supply curve. These are supply of bank reserves. And then we have what I think of as a three-stage or a three-phase demand for reserves. Up at the top, you've got a horizontal range. In between, you've got a downward sloping range. There at the bottom and to the right, you've got another horizontal range. Ample reserves means essentially that the central bank has injected so much money, so many reserves, that the supply curve has shifted far enough to the right that it is in that horizontal range. It is basically no longer able to influence interest rates by moving the supply curve left or right. What they're going to do is they're going to move those slices of bread up and down. So you can see my arrows on the vertical axis. If you can imagine those shifting up and down, it's going to move the policy rate, what I call PR1, up and down with it. All right, I've got an FRQ coming up a little later that addresses ample reserves as in a hypothetical test question. We get a bubbly break. Okay, so I was asked to pull a small number. I chose 3 multiple choice questions from micro and then from macro. And I'll give you a small amount of time to respond to the question. And then I'll advance the slide. We'll talk about the correct answer. All right, it's Girl Scout cookie time. A rational consumer who is eating Girl Scout cookies stops eating when? I will let you read the choices and select accordingly.
For those of you attending live, it's really easy to click and drag the poll box over the side if you need to see the choices, if it's blocking the question.
Let's see if I can do that too. Oh, good. Okay, that's a pretty easy one, so I'm going to advance. All right, so the correct answer is you'll keep eating cookies right up to the point where the marginal benefit equals the marginal cost of the next cookie. That's your stopping point. If you're using marginal analysis, or if you're thinking about marginal analysis, think of a downward sloping marginal benefit for eating cookies. The first cookie is the best, but the additional cookies might still be good, but they're incrementally not providing you as much happiness as the ones that came before. The marginal cost of eating cookies may be constant or it may be upward sloping, it doesn't matter. Once you get to the point where the additional benefit is exactly offset by the additional cost, that's where you stop, because the very next one is going to have a marginal benefit that dips below the marginal cost. That means you enjoy it less than it costs you to consume it. I noticed that choice A was chosen. The total benefit equaling the total cost means that you have actually 0 net benefit subtracting one from the other. And that's possible, but we think that that wouldn't be the rational place to stop eating your cookies. All right, consumers of gadgets generate spillover benefits to their communities, and the gadget market does not account for these spillover benefits. Which of the following would be an appropriate government response to improve efficiency in the gadget market? Okay. Nice. All right. So when you have spillover benefits, you have a positive externality, and that means we get not enough of a good thing. So we need to figure out a way to incentivize more of this, more gadgets. And one way to do that is to subsidize it, give gadget consumers, a little bit of money every time they buy a gadget, which helps offset the price, and they'll buy more of them. Okay, here's a multiple choice question that involves a graph. You'll see these as well. If this firm were a profit maximizing monopolist, the price, output, and profit would be, so we need to find those three things.
Quick reminder, if you are able to answer, just answer, even if you're not sure.
So this is one of those multiple choice questions where you probably devote a little extra time making sure that you get all three of these correct. All right, so the correct answer is choice A. Now here's why. The first thing that you should do is find the profit maximizing output. And that is where the MR intersects the MC. That happens at Q1. So any of those options that refers to Q2 or Q3, you can't even consider those. Well, that narrows it down to three options. The correct price is straight up above from the demand curve and over to the vertical axis. And that's what I call P5. So P5 and Q1 get you 2/3 of the way there. But both choices A and B have P5 and Q1. So we need to get profit correct. Profit is, in a graph like this, seen as a rectangle. It's a rectangle with a horizontal dimension equal to Q1. And the vertical dimension is the distance or difference between the price and the average total cost at that quantity. So at the price, P5, you see point C up there. And if you go vertically straight below to point B, that's the average total cost. So that rectangle, Q1 times the difference between C minus B, would give you the correct profit. So as I said, when you get something like this, it's probably a good idea to slow down a little bit, because you got to make sure all three of these items are correct. All right, let's switch to macro. Which of the following could limit the ability of a central bank to conduct expansionary monetary policy in a banking system with limited reserves? All right, correct answer is money demand being nearly perfectly elastic. All right, now why would this limit the ability of the bank, a central bank, to conduct expansionary monetary policy? All right, so here's where I think you should draw something in the margin of your book. Expansionary monetary policy in the old traditional system of limited reserves would be shifting that money supply curve to the right. And what they want to happen is to lower the interest rate to spur aggregate demand. That's the plan. But if money demand is nearly perfectly elastic, that means it's nearly horizontal. That means the interest rate won't drop hardly at all. And if the interest rate doesn't barely drop, they're not going to get that big boost in aggregate demand that they want. So this is a tougher sort of conceptual money supply type of multiple choice question. It's not straightforward at all, but drawing something might help. All the other options are either going to make it easier to conduct expansionary monetary policy, or in the case of choice E, money supply is already perfectly inelastic, no matter what. Vertical, that is. All right, if the economy is suffering from extremely high rates of inflation, which of the following fiscal policies would be an appropriate strategy for the economy? Okay, so we need to fight inflation with fiscal policy. The best choice of these is to decrease government spending. That will shift aggregate demand to the left, which would fight inflation, and raise taxes, which would do the same thing. So if we were able to combine these two choices, policies, that should fight inflation. Choices A, let's see, A, C, and E would all increase aggregate demand. That would not fight inflation, that would make it worse. Choice D is a policy that would fight inflation, but it's not a fiscal policy. And that's what makes it a little tricky. Anytime you see something about the central bank manipulating interest rates, that's a monetary policy, not a fiscal policy. All right, last one, foreign exchange. As the Japanese economy expands, in what ways do US net exports and the value of the dollar and the yen change? So again, we're going to have to get all three of these parts right. All right, correct answer. Exports, net exports would increase. Here's the reasoning. An expanding Japanese economy means that times are good in Japan. Consumers have money and consumers consume. And that means they're probably going to consume more stuff made in the US. And so, you know, all else equal, we're going to export more to Japan. So our net exports will increase. The second part of that is how's it going to affect the value of the dollar in the currency markets? Well, when foreign consumers want to consume American-made goods, first they have to increase their demand for US dollars. And so we would see a demand curve for the dollar shift to the right, which means that it appreciates or its value rises. The flip side of currency markets is what's happening with the yen in this example. When you increase, if you're a Japanese consumer and you are increasing your demand for the dollar, you have to exchange your yen for dollars, which means you have to supply yen to demand dollars. When the supply of the yen increases, shifts to the right, its value, its price in its currency market goes down. So we're looking for increase, increase, decrease. One tip here, about currency markets is that when you're looking at only two currencies and something is happening on a FRQ or a multiple choice question, they're always moving in the opposite direction. When one is going up, the other is going down. All right. We're almost at an hour, I see, Bob. All right, so I pulled a micro short question. We'll look at that first, and then a macro long question. Keep in mind, these are not actual questions. These are my interpretations of how these questions are written and how they are scored from my experience. All right, I'll let you read. And if you have some paper nearby, go ahead and try this out. Draw the graph. All right, let's take a look at this. And if I go too fast on these FRQs, remember you can go back to the recording. All right, so this is a short question, so this would be worth 5 points, and this is how I broke it down. Part A, 1 point. They asked to draw a correctly labeled supply and demand, the market for pork, and identify Q market and P market. What your reader is looking for is upward S, downward D, and the correct intersection with correct labels. 1 point. Part B asked you to incorporate some additional labels. For example, do you recognize from the prompt that this is a negative externality? So you would want to draw, for the first point, this marginal social cost curve that should be upward sloping and lies above the supply curve. Maybe you labeled the supply curve marginal private cost. That would be great too. The second point would be recognizing that the demand curve is also, in this situation, the marginal social benefit curve. So adding that to the demand curve would get you the second point. And the third part said shade, if there's any deadweight loss, completely shade the area. So the deadweight loss is that gray area that lies above, or let's say between the marginal social cost and the marginal private cost, and the difference horizontally between the current Q market and where the socially efficient quantity would be. I didn't add that to the graph, but it certainly could have been. That would be at the intersection of MSC and the demand curve. So one of the things I want to point out, notice the language there on the part about deadweight loss, shaded completely. This is language that is used by people who are writing those tests. And when you are asked to grade these tests, standardized test, everybody has to grade it the same way. If that triangle is not shaded completely, or if it's sloppy, or, beauty's in the eye of the beholder, but you might lose that point if it's not a neatly, completely shaded triangle. Keep that in mind. All right, last point was there was going to be a subsidy on the production of pork. How was that going to affect deadweight loss? Explain. So this is an assertion. It's going to increase the deadweight loss, but you have to also have a solid explanation. And you might say, if we give a subsidy to the suppliers of pork, that's going to actually shift the market supply curve further to the right. We need to move it to the left. So that area of deadweight loss is only going to get bigger as we move further away from the socially optimal quantity. So for this one, it's mostly graphing, but you'll see other questions where it's almost entirely assert and explain for your entire 5 points. All right, let's move to the dreaded macro long question. So the economy is experiencing a severe recession and the banking system has ample reserves and the budget is currently balanced. I'll let you read the rest. All right, there's more to this question. This is the long 10-point question. Here are the last 3 parts. Okay, let's take a look at the rubric. All right, so the long question is going to be worth 10 points, and this is just my breakdown of the points. In part A, I would say that the first point of the 2 would be earned for stating that the spending policy, as opposed to the tax cuts, would increase real GDP more. The second point would be your explanation. You might explain that the spending multiplier is greater than the tax multiplier in macro. Tax cuts are great. They increase disposable income, but consumers sometimes or often save a portion of that disposable income. And when they save it, they don't spend it, which means that the multiplier effect is smaller. So the best choice would be the spending policy. Okay, part B has 3 points. The first, what happens to the budget? Just assert that deficit. And that would be true even if you chose the tax cuts in part A. Assertion point number 2, interest rates will rise. And then the third point is the explanation. that the government borrowing would cause the demand for loanable funds to shift to the right, or, and this is true in some textbooks, because the supply of loanable funds shifts to the left. Now, in the prompt, I asked you to use the loanable fund market in your explanation. I have a feeling that if you did not refer to the loanable funds market in some way, that you would lose that point at the macro reading. All right, part C gets to the policy that the Fed would use in ample reserves. 1 point for stating that the Fed should lower the policy rate, which we call the federal funds rate. You may, I'm not sure, you may benefit by adding to that they are lowering the interest on reserves, so the IOR. I say that I'm not sure because the macro reading this year, as they confront this full blast for the first time, they will need to determine amongst themselves what is necessary to earn that point. And I'm sure it'll be an interesting conversation, but you can't go wrong by adding that last part about lowering the interest on reserves rate. Part D, you need to draw correctly the reserves market graph. I'll show that here in a second. With the vertical axis labeled as policy rate, this is how it's labeled in the macro CED, and the horizontal axis labeled as quantity reserves. You got to have this vertical supply of reserves and the demand for reserves with 3 ranges and the equilibrium policy rate down there on that initial horizontal range, PR1. And then how I would show, again, they're going to have to figure this out at the macro reading, what is required to earn a graphing point like this. But I would show that vertical shift down of the 2 horizontal ranges, showing that the policy rate PR2 is now lower than it used to be. All right. Sorry, I think I skipped a part. Yeah, I forgot part E. Part E, the rubric would state that real output would increase, and the explanation needs to tie back to the lower interest rates. A perfectly solid and brief explanation would be as simple as the lower interest rates boost investment spending, which shifts aggregate demand to the right. Real output increases. All right, so that concludes my part of the webinar. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Eric. That was terrific. So we'll spend just a few minutes, between 5 and 10 minutes, speaking about our digital offering, which for those of you who are attending the course live, you get access to it right away. And the same for those of you guys who are watching the recording. One of the benefits of attending here is that you get access to this online course. It's going to come in real handy between now and test date. There are 2 different courses, one for AP Macro, one for AP Micro. So here are the URLs and the passwords to get you in. I'll give you a few seconds to either take a picture with your phone or jot them down. And Anya, I believe, has put those in the chat as well. Let me just make sure. Yep. So we can move on. Eric, if you can stop sharing and then I can start.
Absolutely. Okay.
Okay. Can you see that, Eric?
Yes.
Okay. So once you get in, the registration process could not be easier. You just, it's going to ask you for your email address and your name, and it's going to pop you right and the access code. You'll get right in. Don't worry about, we're not going to spam you with any emails. We will send you exactly one email just to verify that you've signed up. You'll get nothing else from us in the future, so no concerns there. The first thing you'll see, I skipped that first intro screen in interest of time. It's going to ask you to pick your test date. Eric, do you know offhand? It's May, what the date of the test is? No. All right. Well, say it's May 9th. Let's take a guess. So maybe one of you guys out there knows what the date is, but if it's May 9th.
Someone said first and second.
Someone said what? First?
First and the second.
First and second. Okay. First thing you do is pop in your date. You now have 41 days left. Goes really fast, right? 41 days until the first, which is test date. Everything in here is going to update. I haven't done anything in here yet. I just logged into this for the first time today. But this will be your dashboard. This will automatically update every time you come into the course. Your knowledge goals, your study plan progress, this will update and give you, sort of an update every time you go through some material, and it'll update every time you come back. Importantly, if you start studying on your laptop in school and you take the first 10 questions in a certain section, and then you're on the bus on the way home and you log in on your phone, it'll start you off on question number 11. It remembers you from your login, from whatever device you're coming from. It's going to update and follow you. Real easy to go through. So this is basically in the dashboard. It'll break it down by everything, every topic that we have broken down. We've got demand, supply, market equilibrium, welfare analysis, macro. Oh, by the way, I'm just using the AP macro to show you guys the examples. The micro one is exactly the same, only with micro content. It's all broken down by everything that's in your 5 Steps to a 5 guide. You've also got a study plan here, which is, again, everything broken down really easily. You want to go back, check on consumption, saving, investment, go through, and you can rate your confidence in certain subjects as you go through. Yep, consumption, saving, investment, multiplier. I know that. I'm going to rate myself high. Consumption and saving. Yep, got that. When it comes to investment, you know what? I better come back to this. This is a little bit, I'm going to rate myself low on a couple of things. And then when I come back to the lessons next time I'm in, I will see the ones that I've rated myself high, I don't really need to go back to. It's the ones that I rated myself low that I figured, you know what, that's a topic I really should come back and review. It's a really good, robust, self-guided study tool. There's a game center. These are basically pretty standard flashcard-based games. You're not going to find anything crazy Fortnite graphics in here, but if you're on the bus, you want to run some flashcards, card hunter, card coupler, you can spend some time exploring these on your own. It's a kind of a fun way, gamified way to go over the content for AP Macro. There's a discussion board. In my experience, these are rarely used, but you do find other students that are sometimes in the platform that'll say, enter something like, hey, for number 9 on test 1, why is it C rather than D? And students will be conversing back and forth on the content. And then the most important stuff is down the bottom. The lessons we already touched on. This is basically everything that's in the book that you get to go through and break down and guide yourself through as you proceed through the topics you'll need to know for test date. The flashcards, I would say, are worth the price of admission alone. You're on the bus. We've got a total of 232 macroeconomics flashcards. Again, they're sort of self-graded, absolute advantage. Yep, we went over that a million times. Did I get it right? Yes. Absolute prices, the price of a good measured. It's just one click. Aggregate demand curve, you know what? Let me go back to that. I'm going to rate myself no. Aggregate income I've got. So then the next time you come back into your flashcards, the ones that you didn't get right will pop up for you again. The ones that you got right will push to the end. So again, it's a pretty basic tool, but a really good tool for studying on the go. There's 232 flashcards that cover most of the topics that are highlighted on the exam. For practice, there's all these practice questions. If you want to concentrate on international trade, we've got 35 questions. Again, when you come back in, all of your average answering time and the number of questions you've taken, your average duration of the session, it's all going to be updated here. So international trade, you can practice the category. You can set the settings to either allow the review answer to be on or off. If it's off, you'll wait till the very end and then be able to see all the questions and answers. I think that in the practice mode, at least, most people do like to have the answers on, so they go through. Using this one as an example, the United States produces rice in the competitive market. With free trade, the world price is lower than the domestic price. What must be true? What do you got, Eric? You want to take a guess on that?
I'm going to go with A.
A. I wouldn't have guessed that. Good job. And then you get to see the answer as you go through. The next one I'm going to guess C. Guess what? That one's wrong. So these practice questions are really good, especially at this time of year. You'll go through every major breakdown of the topics. And perhaps the most important thing that I think we can all agree on is your ability to take full-length tests. Most teachers and authors will tell you it's a good idea to sit and take at least one full practice exam. I know Eric talked about the diagnostic test earlier, but it's 2 hours and 10 minutes long, right? Even if you feel confident that you know the material, always a good idea to take a full-length practice test. You get used to sitting for the entire time, spending the right amount of time on the appropriate section. And this is going to give you just that. 60 multiple questions and 3 questions, long and short free response in section 2. When you start, it's going to start your clock. You're down to 2:09:56. And now for this, you will not be able to see the answers as you go through. If we're mimicking the real thing, it's going to wait and show you the answers at the very end. You won't have time, so you'll be able to spend the entire time taking the test and practicing for test day. That's a really very basic intro to you guys. You now got, and you know what? Maybe I'll jump back and let you share again, Eric. You've got the slides. Oh, let's see if there's questions in the chat. Oh, May's first and second. No, it's actually 4th and 5th. That's okay. When you get in, you can, let's see if we can hit that now, May 4th. All right, so look at that. You got a couple more days. It's 44 or 45 days I'm assuming many of you are taking both, but it's either 44 or 45 days. Thank you for that correction. Again, let's make sure we give them the correct URLs, Eric. As you'll it's just one back.
Go back.
Yep.
Oh no, there we go.
There we go. So again, just take a quick picture. Another reminder, please do feel free to share these. If you're a teacher, share with your fellow educators. If you're a student, throw this information out there to your fellow students. We'd love to get more eyeballs on this. It is a really good, robust platform. You're heading into the last 6 weeks or so, or 44 days actually, before your test. Easy to get in. We'd love to have more eyeballs on this thing. So take a picture, write it down, put the word out, and good luck. I think I'll turn it back over to Eric. We'll see if there's any more questions. If you have any other questions, you can feel free to type up now. I don't see anything in the Q&A or the chat.
Yeah, I'm happy to spend a couple of minutes that we have left.
Yeah. If you've got any questions, we can address them now. If not, oh, here we go. It's just thank you, Simona. Well, you're very welcome. Thanks for attending. Thanks very much. Share those with your friends. I think maybe we'll wait a couple more seconds. If we don't see any more questions, we'll call it early. We're looking about 8 or 9 minutes early. Good place to be, Eric. Yeah.
Yep.
Great. Start using it tonight. Love it.
I appreciate everybody attending both live and later on in the recording. Good luck to you and your students.
Yeah. All right. Well, if there's no more questions, good luck, everybody. We're going to call it early. Thank you very much for attending. And take care. Thanks,
Yeah.
Eric. Thanks very much. Terrific.